Welcome to RECO12. My name is Justin, and I am a recovering addict. This month, in the month of December of 2022, we're doing something different. Back in 2019, I was hosting another podcast called Journey Through Life. It was a long-form conversation, interview-style podcast. It was not recovery-related, although I was actively working my recovery. During this time, I felt compelled by my higher power to do a series on the Journey Through Life podcast called Journey in Recovery. In this series, I interviewed 16 people over a 3-month period on each of the 12 steps of recovery. It was during this 3-month period that my own recovery walk was radically changed, and my vision of what the steps can do for anyone, anywhere, from any background was drastically opened up. It was after this series that the idea of the RECO12 speaker meeting podcast came to be. Anyways, as normal, if you find value in RECO12, please consider donating. Those links will be in the show notes of the podcast. Also, consider rating and reviewing RECO12 in the podcast platform of your choice. We will be getting back to our live speaker meetings starting in January, on January 6th of 2023. And we are booked out almost into May already, and I'm really grateful for that. Anyways, here is a little bit more about today's episode. Today we will be hearing from the experience, strength, and hope of Kastle S. I really loved the vulnerability that Kastle shares in his story and his experience with trusting in God through the third step of recovery. Now, step 3 is the step that every single person that I interviewed in this journey in recovery process went back to as kind of the hinge pin of their recovery, and it is the hinge pin of my recovery. So Kastle is my second conversation about step 3. We heard from Bill M. earlier this week, and this one will be from Kastle S. Kastle, like many of these people that I really got to know first here during this journey in recovery process, have become not just recovery friends or mentors, but also personal friends in and out of recovery. And Kastle is one of those people. And I love Kastle. He's one of my favorite people in the world. Now, while you listen to this, take notes, mental, physical notes of ideas of self-improvement that pop into your head. Then at the end of this, review those notes and make a plan about how you can implement those. All right. Now let us get to hearing Kastle and his experience, strength, and hope on step 3. Sitting here with Kastle.
Yes.
Kastle, why don't you introduce yourself as if you were in a 12-step meeting?
Yeah, so my name is Kastle, and I am always just really grateful to talk about these steps and my road to recovery. I know that I'm loved, and so because of that, it's changed my life.
Very cool. So tell me a little bit about your story, your experience in life. Maybe the first time you kind of got involved into an addiction of some sort, but really weren't aware of it at the time, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I was 13 years old is when I had my first encounter with pornography online. I don't know if I was intentionally seeking it out. You know, the internet's an interesting place, but it found me, as it tends to do. And I definitely, it was exciting. I had never seen anything like this before. I was a little confused at the same time, but then I also felt a lot of shame and guilt because obviously I had been raised in the church up until this point, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where, we're not supposed to look at those things. And obviously I didn't have a complete understanding of what those things even was. Bless all those teachers' hearts in church. They do not always know how best to teach that lesson, and that's okay. That's not their fault.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of shame and guilt. And then because of that shame and guilt, I didn't again encounter it until a little bit later. And a little bit later, when I was around 16, 17, is also when I started kind of going to parties and different things like that. And of course, there was alcohol. There were other things besides alcohol also. And for me, anytime I ever got involved in anything, I had looking back now, I realize I have such an addictive personality to anything. Anything that I like and that lights me up, I am full in. I am all the way in. I'll Google everything about the subject and look at everything and watch every single show and movie on the topic. I just get sucked into things so quickly. But that's kind of the beginning, was my teenage years. And no, I wouldn't classify it as an addiction to myself back then.
At that time, you were just having a good time or whatever? That's
Absolutely.
What you were thinking?
Yeah, it was just a good time.
Yeah. So when was the first time? I mean, you mentioned when you were 13, the first time you saw pornography on the internet. You felt that shame and that guilt. It was kind of this. You felt bad about what you had done or seen. Did you have that same emotion when you were 16 and 17 when you went into those parties and those other places that you were having these experiences?
You know, the interesting thing about going to the parties and those experiences is that I honestly don't remember the shame and guilt. Not with that. So the fascinating thing is like with the alcohol and with potential other things that I didn't get into, but man, I was right on the line of doing it several times. Was that the shame and guilt wasn't tied to that, but the shame was powerfully tied to the pornography and the sexual sins, you know, the masturbation, the whatever it is on the sexual side. Oddly enough, it wasn't the alcohol and the drug side of things that I was ashamed of. It was the sexual side of it.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think that with the sexual side of addiction, that I think it's actually much less talked about and much less discussed. Even within the church itself, it seems like sex is such a mysterious topic. Don't ever talk about it. Don't ever think about it. But I mean, we freely say from the pulpit and in class, don't drink alcohol, don't do drugs. We say that in school, don't drink alcohol, don't drink drugs. But we don't talk about sex unless it's sex ed.
Right.
And I feel like even in addiction recovery groups, it's almost like the one that's the most hidden still is the sexual side of addiction.
Yeah, very interesting. I remember for myself the first time I ever heard somebody say that, and it wasn't the person who said it. It was like a news report on somebody else who had said that he was a sex addict. And this was back in probably the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. And I remember thinking when I heard that report, there's no such thing as sex addiction. Every dude wants sex all the time. It's not an addiction. It's what life is, you know? And I just kind of thought, well, that's stupid. And I wonder how much of that is still, that mind frame is still out there. Is that something that you can relate to?
100%. I mean, even now, I think it's almost laughable to most of society to say, oh, I struggle with the pornography addiction. It's like, me too, and everyone else, you know? But what they don't understand, I think, is that I would literally call into work. I remember one time in particular, 3 days in a row to view pornography for about 13 hours plus straight for those 3 days in a row. And that wasn't unusual on a day off for me. I literally called out of both of my jobs because I felt this insatiable desire to view pornography.
Yeah.
That is not normal.
No.
That is not a man who just wants sex. There's more to it than that at that point.
When was the first time you came to a realization, I may have an issue here that's not healthy?
Absolutely. I think it was probably when I was around 19 is when I had kind of, it's so funny because it's ironic because we're at a new year right now, right?
Right.
And it was a New Year's resolution. I remember actually thinking over my life and first time I had prayed in a long time and really talked to God. And that's when I came to the realization. I mean, it was almost like he was just waiting for me to ask for help. And suddenly in my mind came in all these things like, you need to stop going to these parties. You need to stop hanging out with these people at these places. You know that pornography is something that you shouldn't be doing. It was like he was sending me these messages right after I started praying for them. Even though I hadn't in so long. He was just waiting for me.
And did you feel shamed at that point when you got those messages, do you think?
You know, the interesting thing is I felt shame every time after I would view pornography, every time after there was masturbation, every time after I was scrolling through Craigslist to meet up with someone, I would feel the shame. But when I talked to God about it, that's the amazing thing is no. It's weird. It was like I was being confronted with all the things that I didn't want to admit to myself, but it felt good, which sounds so crazy. I mean, it kind of hurts because the truth, I believe, can hurt very badly. It hurt, but it didn't hurt as much as every other time I felt that shame.
Now, I want to stop there a minute and kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent from what the core of this is. How do you now in your life, when you're a father, you have children, I think they're pretty young.
Yes, God bless
still, but still, when they do something that needs to be confronted with the truth, how do you now try and do it in a way that doesn't induce shame?
Yes.
Instead of, that's something that I've struggled with my whole life, is when I'm confronting my kids with something, a lot of times they feel shame because of the way I approach it. So how can one approach things that way so shame isn't the overlying? effect?
Well, I am a perfect parent. That is a total lie and a joke. No, I definitely have my fair share of yelling and reacting in the moment. But, truly thanks to coming to terms with being an addict and to understanding that shame is such a powerful tool, I feel like that the enemy uses to drag you back into your addiction, or the mind uses. And so as a parent, I really focus with my children on the action. I truly feel that there's a division between shame and guilt. Guilt is you've done a bad thing. Shame is you are a bad thing. You're bad. And guilt is, that was bad. I shouldn't do that again. Shame is you're bad. You're awful. So, always telling my kids, hey, do you know why mommy and daddy don't like it when you do that? It's because when you do that, you hurt our feelings, because that was something that was really important to us, that we put a lot of time and effort into. And so it makes us really sad when you throw things at that picture, or when you break that, because it makes mommy and daddy care about that, and we love you. That's why we bring those things here. So when you do that, once again, focusing on when you do that, it makes us sad. Not you make us sad. Right. You made us so sad. Bad, and we really steer clear of those terms. I have two boys that are about 4 and 2, and we very, very much try our very best to steer clear of that label, bad boy, naughty boy. Right. Because once again, that's tagging it to them. Yeah. You are a bad boy, not, hey, you did a bad thing and that hurt my feelings, and we don't want to do that. You're bad. We try to really be careful of the vernacular that and the verbiage that we use when we do go into those disciplinary conversations.
So let's bring that back to the conversation you had with God and the personal revelation that you felt you had at that time. So what you said, you were confronted with the truth, but you didn't feel shame from it. How did that motivate you then to take whatever steps needed to be taken at that time to make some changes?
Absolutely. I think one of the ways that conversation with God, when I started receiving that, that hurtful truth that you need to change some things in your life, the big motivation behind it, really was, I actually felt that it was coming from a place of love. And it sounds so melodramatic from middle-class American to be talking about how hard their life was in high school and in their teenage years. But truly, from obviously the perspective that I had in life, I didn't believe that anyone believed in me. I didn't believe that anyone expected me to do good things. I didn't believe that anyone expected me to be able to improve and to go big places in life. I really didn't. I didn't expect myself to, for example, go to college. I had never heard anyone else tell me that they expected me to go to college. I had never had, besides maybe one high school teacher who I love her to death because she was the one who I felt believed in me even back then. But otherwise, people just expected me to be Kastle. I was the clown. I was funny. I was a good time at the parties. I could always get things going and riled up. And that's all I was expected to be. And so that's all I behaved like. But when God, communicated to me that I was loved and I was worth doing better for and improving for, that was the motivation. It became an identifier for me in who I was. You're not just a clown. You're not just the fun guy to call up before the party. You're not just a failure. You're not just someone who's just going to skate along in life. You're loved, and I have big things planned for you, and you can do them.
That's such a hard thing to make a separation in my own life is I am one who, in my own eyes, have seen myself as much greater than what I have lived up to. It's this pride thing,
Oh, I know.
And I've had a lot of people in my life kind of help lift me up. It doesn't sound like you had that same situation at that time.
No.
But my self-abasing behavior is that I didn't live up to those expectations.
Interesting.
That I felt others set for me.
Yeah, so yours was almost the inverse of what mine was.
And either way, it's painful. And I think it's pride either way.
Oh, I agree.
Pride, I'm better than you or whatever, or everybody else is out to get me. I'm less than 100%. How do you now try and keep that right sized? That ego, I guess.
Totally. Well, I have a very good relationship with pride, so I do feel qualified to talk about that instead of parenting. But I would say that the way that I try to kind of avoid pride in that sense of, one of the big things that my boss actually that I've had for the last 3 years, and my really good friend Randy, we always have these great discussions, but one time we were talking about expectations, and she gave me a quote from a conference or a book that she had been reading where she said, misaligned expectations are the root cause for all the problems in the world. And when I thought about that more deeply, I thought, oh my goodness, my expectations for who I was were misaligned. When I had no expectations for myself. So my expectation was, I will be what everyone else expects me to be. I'll be the clown. I'll be the crazy one at the party. I'll be whatever you want me to be. But then on the inverse, Justin, when I felt like when I had come back to God, I came back into the church, I had served my mission. Coming back is when I felt the opposite way that you're talking about, where coming back from the mission, it's like, oh my gosh, in 3 months I'm going to be engaged. I'm going to have a master's degree in a year. I'm going to be making six figures, because I was ready. I was on fire. Everyone believed in me on my mission. So then when I started meeting with this disappointments of not meeting those expectations, that's actually what led me back to my first relapse in 4 years. Was because I felt like I wasn't adding up to all those expectations I had of me when I got back home from my mission. So once again, misaligned expectations. It's the sin of comparison. Comparison is pride. Even if it's to myself in this, I don't know how to say it exactly, but in this fantasy of myself or this high expectation of me, I'm comparing myself to something that's not in the present, which is what recovery is all about. I'm comparing to myself either to my past self or to a future self that doesn't yet exist, instead of focusing on what can I do right now today to meet the expectations that God has set for me.
Very cool. So you talked about these misaligned expectations, unrealistic expectations that led to your relapse, your first relapse after 4 years of being sober. How did you get sober the first time?
Stress and trauma happen inside of our bodies, so we can't just heal them through talking. We must also heal them through feeling. My name is Luis Mojica. I'm a somatic educator and nutritionist, and I'm also the host of the Holistic Life Navigation podcast, where every week I teach you how to release stress and trauma and find a safety inside of yourself through nutrition, self-inquiry, and somatic experiencing. Join me over at the Holistic Life Navigation podcast or visit me at holisticlifenavigation.com.
Yeah, I think the first time, even when I was 19, is kind of when I started on my journey back to God, coming back to the church. And when I met with my bishop, obviously, he was such a loving man, and I was able to, he was the head of our congregation, so I was able to kind of open up to him all the things that had gone on in my teenage years and in my life. But interestingly enough, neither him or I labeled it as addiction, even then. We didn't. But we just looked at it as something that was a barrier to me and Christ, and so we worked on it. And so I was given assignments. I started reading scriptures every day for the first time in my life. I started praying morning and night, first time in my life. I started going to church every week. It had been a long time since that had happened. And I got an opportunity in our church to serve others by teaching a children's Sunday school class in primary. And so I think it was interesting. It was almost like mini steps. Like that was even part of my step 12 was being able to teach those kids about how God loved them and things like that. And then that year I got to clean up and head out on my mission. And then my mission kind of made it a pretty easy place, at least for me in my case, to stay sober. I know it's not the case for everyone.
Right.
But for me, I was on just such a high of the expectation that I wasn't going on my mission because people expected me to. I had flipped. I was going on my mission because I knew how much God loved me. I had felt that in that year. And so I was going to do whatever I could to show him that I loved him too. And there was no greater way in my mind as a 20-year-old than to give up 2 years of my life to go and try and tell other people how much God loved them.
Now let's come back to the 4 years later. Let's talk about what led up to that. You mentioned the misaligned expectations, but what led up to that in addition maybe to those misaligned expectations? And then how long did you wallow in the mire, I guess, before another awakening happened?
One of my good skills is wallowing in mires, so another topic we can talk about. But I think that's a great question. After the 4 years, coming back from serving my 2-year mission for the church, and actually it was so funny because when I came back, I truly did. I just felt on fire. I felt like nothing could stop me. And it's so funny because for a fact, I knew that I wasn't going to go back to alcohol or to even go and try and indulge in those drugs or anything like that again. I mean, that one was pretty set for me. And I even got a smartphone. coming back to be in it with everyone else. That's what I spent my savings on. So smart. And I felt no temptation, even for the sexual side of sins. Zero. It wasn't even a thought, even though it was right there in my hand. And as an addict, I was always like, if I could just get my hands on a smartphone, it'd be so much easier to access all of this. Yeah. But I think it was a compilation of a lot of things, to be honest, Justin. I had high expectations of myself, and a year later, once again, I realized I wasn't meeting them. I was not getting the best grades I could have. Nobody wanted to date me. I was looking at all the people around me who were dating really attractive, smart, spiritually strong individuals. I was looking at other people in school, and they seemed to be able to manage their grades so well while still dating, while still doing extracurricular activities. And I just felt like I was struggling to stay afloat. I felt like I was gaining weight. I felt like my appearance was, going down. There were just all of these things that were piling up, and then the relapse actually happened during finals week, during an exam week. Shocker.
Yeah, high stress, huh?
Yep, the stressors were on. I was not getting the best grades. I had pressure to perform. I knew, because I had that calculator, what if I get this grade? Will I pass this class? Yeah. And I had to get some good grades to pass all my classes. And I was stressed. My family was really proud of me for being the first one out of my siblings to go to college, and for it to be BYU, which is a tough college. And other people always were like, man, you've just done so well. And I felt like everyone was expecting me to be so perfect. And the truth was I wasn't, but I wasn't willing to say that or admit it. I wanted to keep up the appearance that I was. And so during that finals week, one night, I couldn't handle it anymore. I didn't want to work on my paper or my tests because I felt like I was failing and I couldn't focus on them. So I looked for distraction. And the distractions, they found me rather quickly and easily on the wide internet web. And that was my first time going back to pornography.
After that first time, what were your feelings and emotions afterwards?
Absolutely. So in true addict fashion, I didn't just go back to pornography. That sounds so simple. I stayed up from 11 p.m. to, 4 a.m. straight, watching pornography, straight, like a true addict would. No breaks, no pause, just on my smartphone. And I would have continued.
Right.
Truly and honestly, and I wanted to, but I was just physically exhausted. And then... the fascinating thing, Justin, is that when I have those relapses, I didn't feel the shame yet. I was on this high. And it's because neurologically, my brain pathways were lit up. Yeah. They were so excited to get the stimuli they hadn't had for 4 years and had learned to rely on. And so it washed away all my worry about the tests. It did. And so I was like, okay, it's fine. I'll just pray and it will be better when I wake up. That is not the case. Right. Here comes the shame in the morning that hit me like a ton of bricks. And you better believe I called out of work the next day. And here was the cycle again in my own head. I'm like, here you go. Called out of work, didn't go to any of my school classes. Yes, I did view more pornography. Shocker. But I hated myself the whole probably 2, 3, maybe 4 days. Like true self-hatred. Even looking in the mirror, it was like, I hate you. Yeah. You're an awful human being. How could you do this? What is wrong with you? And it's all these... I knew you wouldn't get over this. I knew you would turn back into who you were. Yeah. Were the voices that were just crushing me for 4 days straight. I think I skipped class the next day too. I just couldn't... I couldn't even function. I was completely in my own head with shame.
Wow. So... I'm going to jump ahead in the story a little bit here. I think we've got a good view of what the shame and the feelings and the actions, the things that led into it. Tell me about your first time going to an addiction recovery meeting of any kind and what your maybe fears going into it initially were and what your experience was that first time.
That is such a great question. So my first time attending an addiction recovery meeting, highly resistant. I think it had been suggested to me maybe one other time by a bishop and one other time maybe by someone in school. And I was like, not for me. I'm not like an addict. You know what I mean? I have a problem sometimes.
A little problem.
Yeah, it's a little problem. It's not a big deal. But and so obviously when the next relapse came around and I was filled with that self-hatred again, here comes the shame. It was finally like, okay, we have to try something different. We have to. And so the first time going, I did not want to go. I'm like, I have better things to do. I have school. I have friends. I need to sleep. I have work. And driving to the building, and watching other people just from the parking lot. I'm like parked four places back. I don't want anyone to see me. I'm like, this is so embarrassing. What if someone I know is there? What if they see me there? And then they'll know I'm a freak.
Yeah.
I'm a weirdo. I'm not the Kastle who everyone expects. That guy who can say a really good prayer or like always uplift people with scriptures or with good thoughts, who's always positive. That's the Kastle that everyone wants now. And if they see me in there, they realize I'm a fake.
Right.
I was never that person. So I sat in my car for 45 minutes. I think the meetings had been going on for about 20 minutes by that point because I got there way early. And in my head, the thought was just, I'm not like them, Heavenly Father. I have a problem, but I'm not crazy. Like I'm not those psycho people who like live in their parents' basements, and like have no friends. Like I'm a good person. I'm not like them. I'm actually good deep down underneath it all.
Right.
So then I finally just got the courage to walk in though. And wouldn't you know it, everyone there too was a good person like me. All these return missionaries who were just so kind to me and so warm and so welcoming and had callings in the church and who were, some of them were students in college, some of them were fathers, grandfathers, and they were just like me. Good people who so happened to be striving for recovery in an addiction.
Did you see that the first time you went in those last few minutes that, hey, these guys are just like me?
I did. You could feel
cool.
it coming into the room. I mean, just radiating. They wanted me to be there. I got that sense when I walked in, the smiles, people coming right up to me after the meeting, though I tried to run out.
Yeah.
I was like, we're going to get out of here. I knew. And in that meetings particular, people could write down their phone numbers as an option into their sign-up sheet if they wanted. And so I just did mine anyway. I was like, whatever. And then there were several people who texted me after just saying, hey, I'm so glad you came. I hope we see you again.
Oh, that's cool.
And I was like, oh my gosh, you hope you see me again? Really? Here?
What does that mean?
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah.
I don't want to see you again.
Right.
Oh, good. One meeting, I'm over.
So what motivated you? Was it those reach outs that motivated you to keep going back? Or did you go back the next week or a few days later or whatever?
I did go back the next week. And I think really, Justin, that's correct. I think inclusion is one of my big things that I always try to be so cognizant of, is because when someone feels included, when someone feels welcomed and they feel like it's a place for them, they're so, I don't know, it's so much easier, at least for me in those situations, to come back. And so I did come back because they told me, we're so glad you're here. We hope to see you again. And it's like, wow, really? And it sounds so silly to be convinced by someone telling you they were happy to see you and they hope they see you again. But believe me, in those vulnerable situations, those words are powerful. And the words of others around me, when they were sharing and saying, me too, I felt that way. In all their words, all I kept hearing was, me too, me too. I'm just like you. So I felt like I belonged, and that's why I went back.
Oh, that's really cool. So tell me about your foray into working the steps, getting a sponsor, so on and so forth, how that experience happened. Just a little bit of overview of that.
I think I naively, after going the first time and me being the person who always wanted to achieve more, I like blazed through steps 1, 2, and 3, at least the study, portion of it, like, whoa, these are great to read. I love these scriptures and these questions are so great. I love writing about these things, and then you hit step 4 and it's like, wait, what? And so it was really fun for me, but I don't think I really started working my steps until I had been going to the meetings for maybe, honestly, about a year, because that's when I got a sponsor.
Okay.
And when I got a sponsor, it was through a third-party program that was also running.
What was it called?
It was arpsupport.org. It was run by a wonderful man named Mark. Yeah, it was wonderful to get involved in that because they set the expectations so clearly. It was all outlined in the document when you decided to sign on and get involved. You knew what was expected of you. You know if what you did was over the bounds, there were clear consequences.
Yeah.
And for me, a dummy like me, I needed those really clear lines drawn in the sand. And I think that might be an addict thing. Because once again, extremism in any form, including recovery.
Right.
And so getting a sponsor, oh my gosh, it changed everything for me. Really having someone who would say, hey, Kastle, I just read through your journal last night. And you talked a little bit about feeling shame and sadness today, but you didn't elaborate too much. Would you mind elaborating a little more? and responding to me on why you felt those things. Because I would just write, I felt kind of shamed and sad today, and so I got some ice cream, and then we'll just move on. But the sponsor, he wanted me to tell him more. He would push me to force me to say out loud or to write down out loud the things that had made me feel that, which I didn't want to say. I didn't want anyone to ever know why I felt shame deep down inside. But through doing that with a sponsor who I knew was coming from a place of care meant so much. It changed my whole recovery, having a sponsor guide me through who said, hey, I've done this. I get it. It's tough, but you need to have this completed by the end of the day because that's what's expected of you. And it's like, oh my gosh, but Grant, I have 2 exams today. And he's like, I understand that. And I think you'll do great on the exams, but this needs to be completed before the end of the day. Yeah. It's like, dang, like these people aren't kidding.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's what I needed for my recovery. I needed people who weren't kidding. I needed people to say, you are an addict and you have a problem. And if you do not follow through on this, it will continue on the cycle.
Yeah. So before I move on to what we're going to talk about here, there was one thing you mentioned there. You wrote in a journal and you shared it with your sponsor, and your sponsor held you accountable to that. Yes. Now, a lot of people are going to think, what the crud? You're sharing your journal with somebody that you may or may not even know personally, and they're telling you about it. Why was that important? And why is that important?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, and it sounded nuts to me. You better believe it sounded crazy to me when I read the sign up, all the rules and guidelines that you sign and agree to, where it's like they will read your journal every night. I mean, because I had been journaling since a year before I started my mission every day. And so I was like, you're going to read my journal? Like, that's creepy. That's weird. Like, why do you need to read my journal? But like it says a lot in the step works, I had hit that my rock bottom. And so I just would do anything to get out of it. I thought it was weird. And so you better believe that I was intentionally altering some of my journal entries because Hawthorne effect, I knew it would be observed by someone else.
Right.
And he called me on it every time where he was able to find that I was clearly trying to hide behind words what my emotions were. Yeah. And it was very strange. And sometimes, once again, truth hurts. When he would say that to me, I'd be like, excuse me, please don't tell me what to write in my personal journal.
Right.
Please don't tell me how I felt because I know how I felt. But once again, even though the truth hurt and it was irritating sometimes or upsetting to be told I need to elaborate on my feelings, it was what set me free because then I would. Because I had signed up, I became addicted to recovery. So I would do anything to continue on the lines. And that changed my whole recovery. And I started to be completely honest in my journals, even more so than when I was just doing it myself. Truly.
No, that's really cool. I really appreciate that sharing of that. Kastle, one of the purposes that we are sitting down together today is to talk about step 3. Yes. Now, before I jump into this, I've done 8 or 9 of these interviews already for the 12 steps before ours. And almost every single one of them, no matter what step it is that they are sharing about and whatever step they say they live in, which is a really powerful thing, by the way, to think about. Everybody goes back to step 3 at some point and says basically this phrase of what step 3 is. And I'll read what Alcoholics Anonymous step 3 is. Okay. And then I'll read what the program, the addiction recovery program, the key principle of it there, so that all of us have kind of a framework of where we're coming from here. Step 3 reads, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And from the addiction recovery program of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the key principle reads in step 3, decide to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, the Eternal Father, and his Son, Jesus Christ. So tell me a little bit about what those principles mean to you, and then we'll talk a little bit about your experience in life in that.
Absolutely. I love the way that both are written, and I actually might lean a little bit towards the Alcoholics Anonymous definition, if I'm being completely honest, because I love the phraseology of as you understand him, or as God is to you, because that takes me back once again to a present mindset, because the God that I knew, or who I thought I knew and understood and had a relationship when I started the 12 steps, versus the God I know when I completed them, versus the God I know now, years later, they're different. And I don't necessarily think that it's God that's different. It's me who's different. But obviously that changes my understanding and perspective of him as I continue to learn. But that means so much to me because, Justin, I have so many doubts. I have so many questions about Christianity. I have so many questions and doubts and things that I don't agree with about the church that I go to, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I mean, sometimes with certain phraseology, even with that's written within the 12 steps, I disagree, the way that it's written. But what I don't disagree with and what I can never disagree with is that the fact that God has my best interests in mind. And if I just trust in him, no matter what doubts I have, no matter what misunderstandings I have or things that I disagree with, I'll be okay. And that has proven itself time and time again in my darkest, lowest times. If I just say, God, I'm going to let go and I'm just going to trust you. I'm going to have no expectations for today or for myself. Can you take this from me? Without a single exception, he's been there and I've been able to make it through that day.
Very cool. I appreciate your candor and your sharing of that. And I also really love that phrase, the God as we understood him. So what does that mean to you to make a decision to turn your will and your life over to that?
Oh my gosh, it sucks. It's terrible to turn your life and your will over to God. It's like the only thing that nobody can take from me is my will and my free agency. I can say whatever I want, or even if I don't say it, I can think whatever I want.
Right.
When I disagree with you. But with turning my will and my trust over to God, it's literally putting myself in the most vulnerable position I've ever been in my entire life. I've never been that, with other humans, I'm never able to be that vulnerable to completely trust them because they're human. I'm not
right.
But with God, it's forcing me to live what I believe. Do you believe that God loves you? Do you believe that God has your best interest in heart? Yes, I believe those things. Then give me all of it. I want all of everything. I love a C.S. Lewis quote that illustrates that for me where, he's saying that God doesn't want so much, or actually it's not a C.S. Lewis quote. I think it's in just the 12-step book, but either way, it's, he wants more than your time and your talents and your abilities. He wants your whole heart. The one thing that you can give God all the money, donate to charities, you can give as much time giving volunteer work, but when you give up your very heart and say, I will do anything that you say and I will trust you no matter where that path leads. Oh, that's vulnerable because I don't want to walk the path that he asked me to do sometimes. Sometimes I say that prayer and I'm all humble and stuff. And then he's like, perfect, call this person today. I'm like, no, I'd rather not. That's not what I meant when I said, I want to know your will. You were supposed to tell me something that I wanted to do.
You're supposed to tell me something that's going to make me $1 million today,
Totally. I'm like, that doesn't really line up with my goals right now. But it's being willing to put all of that aside, literally everything I want and everything that I believe is good. Even if I'm like, well, God, no, what I know to be good is I'm supposed to do this today and help this person. And he says, no, I want you to help this person and do that. I mean, one instance in particular that illustrates it to me because I became even addicted to productivity on my mission, like numbers, stats, being busy all the time. And so coming home, I still had that. And I remember one day I prayed to him. I'm like, God, I was the executive assistant for the head of our church, the bishop in our congregation at that time. So I'm like, I have all these appointments set for him. Plus we have a church activity for a group that I'm involved in. I'm volunteering for. I'm like, I have an exam that I have to study for tomorrow. I'm going on a date tomorrow. So I kind of just, want to get myself ready for that. And then all these different things. I'm like, I want to call this cousin. And I just laid out all my plans to him. I'm like, my day's really busy, but I'm open to what you want me to do. The response, none of those things. Read a book. Lie down. And it's like, lie down. Did you hear me? I have a lot of things to do. I'm a busy person. I'm important. Well, using my busyness as a badge of importance. Right. Yes, I was addicted to it, actually. And then it felt crazy to me. Like, you want me to lie down and just read this fiction novel that I got from the library 4 weeks ago and haven't had a chance to touch? Yeah, that's what I want you to do today. And that was really hard for me. I canceled all of those plans, even though people were counting on me. I was volunteering to come to these things, and I just felt that weight, and my heart was beating so fast as I started reading this book. Like, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do, but it was exactly what I was supposed to do.
Why?
It was exactly what I was supposed to do because the moment that I continued reading that book, maybe an hour or 2 hours in, man, I felt this peace and this clarity that I hadn't had for weeks. It all suddenly became very clear. It was almost like through reading, God knows me perfectly, so I love to read. That's like my first love is reading books. And so he was able to pull my brain out of my day-to-day busyness and the minutia of every day that I was living in and say, use that time to relax my mind. And then he showed me the things that I needed to cut out. And he basically told me, you're trying to be important by being busy. And I don't need you to be important by being busy. You are important because you're mine. And
it's not because of what you do.
Never because of what
who
you do.
You are.
It's because of who you are. And And actually I was able to see that a lot of the times my plans were the things that were leading me to feel shame and triggered. They would make me tired. I was too tired, and tiredness leads me to be triggered really fast for me personally. Feeling like I failed in an exam or a date didn't go well, or even when I volunteered that I didn't fulfill my part as well. Man, I felt shame sometimes. I was like, man, you're just not good enough for what people want you to be or need you to be. I was carrying the world on my shoulder, and he's like, I never asked you to do that. I just asked you to listen to me and follow me. It was so hard to give up all those plans because my self-worth was tied to them, sadly, to be completely honest back then. But when I fully trusted in him, it's that peace. It always comes back to this feeling of peace that I get when I really trust in him, even when I don't want to.
What does that look like on a daily basis to turn your life and your will over to the care of God as you understand him?
Great question. So yes, on a day-to-day basis, turning my will over to God, it's almost like a microcosm of that experience that I just shared, where every day, I'm still, I still keep myself pretty busy. I have things that I'm involved in, things that I want to get done. So when I do, for example, my step 10 every morning, I lay out my plans for my day, what I'm planning to do. But in my morning prayer, and even when I finish that, it's always with, but what do you want me to do today? Or God, if anything in my plan needs to be changed, will you please make it abundantly clear? Because I'm a dummy and I don't always see it if you whisper it to me. Right. But I need you to make it clear to me today and I want you to know that I am willing to change these things for you. And then in my prayer, I always say, today I choose to give my heart to you and to trust you.
No, I like that. And then as you go throughout your day, I'm just going to speak from my own experience. Yeah. When I find myself taking my own will back and saying, this is what I want to do, how do you check yourself in those situations?
Oh, I'm so good at that because, of course, that prayer sounds amazing. I wish I could say, and I absolutely lived it every single day, but that would not be true. Right. So some of the days, I consciously sometimes, I know that I'm going against his will because I'm like, God, I don't want to. Like, I don't have the energy for that, and I just don't want to. So how I kind of check, how I really, best case scenario when I'm trying to really check myself is I have to take a break from everything. I have to put down my computer that I'm working on. I have to put my phone aside. I have to stop talking to people. I talk a lot, if you couldn't tell. And so I have to just completely separate myself. And I have to, throughout the day, I say a lot of quick little mini prayers is what I like to call it, where I'm always, anytime I get a quick free moment, I'm not talking to someone or I'm not working, it's, hey God, this is kind of what I'm doing right now. Like, how are you doing? Like, is there anything, do you need me to do this? Or I got given updates on what I'm doing throughout my day. Like, this is what I've been doing. I think that this is what I'm supposed to be doing because I felt impressed this morning. I think it went okay. I'm praying for them. Is there anything else? And sometimes it's nothing. I just carry on. But other times it's distinctly clear, yes. And actually something that I struggle with still is sometimes the answer is, I already told you. Why are you asking me? It's like, dang it. Then I'll ask again, like the next time I get a minute after a 2-hour meeting or something, it's like, I already told you. It's like,
Yeah.
It's like, I know, but could you tell me something else?
That was in the past. Yeah. I don't want to dwell on the past.
I'm in the present, Lord.
Exactly.
But one way that I actually consciously check myself too is every time I get an impression, I write it in my phone really quick. I write it in a notes section that I have that's labeled impressions. And I kind of put stars next to it where it's like, this is something God's asked me to do. This is something good that came into my mind. And at the end of the day or throughout my day, I flip back to it. Which ones have you done? Which ones haven't you done?
That's a fantastic idea. So it's just like in the notepad section or something like that?
Yep, just the notepad section.
Impressions, and you just type it in real
quick.
It's
impressions label.
That's a great habit to get into, I think.
Yeah.
About how often do you think you get into that every day?
I try to get into it, right, best case scenario, at least once in the morning, because that's also where I keep scriptures and quotes that hit me. I just copy and paste them over or type them in real quick or paste the picture that I take of something. And so I like to look through those, definitely before I write in my journal every day, but when I get a break at work or first thing in the morning, because I don't always finish all the ones from the day before. I wish I could say I did, but it's going back and being like, oh, he did already tell me. Or sometimes when I ask for new guidance, he's like, check the folder. And there's still 3 things remaining from the day before. It's like, got it.
No, that's fantastic. So when you're having these mini prayers or your prayer in the morning and you have those impressions, you make kind of a checklist out of them.
A quick note. Yeah, just a quick, basically it's kind of like a checklist, which sounds dangerous for an addict because I can get addicted to checklists too. But thankfully, I think God knows my heart. And so even when I can feel myself getting anxious over my checklist, like, oh my gosh, there's 7 things on there. I'm never going to get to all of them. Then I feel like sometimes God steps in and he's like, that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's once again that thing of, you don't have to take the world on your shoulders. If I would have just listened to God in the moment every time, honestly, that I felt an impression, I could just send a quick text immediately. I could just do a quick phone call immediately. And that's best case scenario, obviously, with things that come up in life, but it doesn't always happen. And I think it sounds crazy, but I think even sometimes my list might pile up just so that he can check if I'll turn back to him again when I feel overwhelmed, and not just do the good thing, which is going through my checklist and finishing all the good things that I've impressed to, but will I do the better and the best thing of turning back to God and saying, this is the list. It has 9 things on it. Are these 9 things the most important thing to me to do right now? Or which one or 2? Because God, I only have an hour today.
Right.
I only have time for 3 out of the 9. Will you show me which one they are?
Yeah.
He does.
So you shared one experience in working your step 3 where it made no sense.
Oh, yeah.
Cancel all those things and sit down and read a book. Come into today's life, into the present of the last, couple months.
Yeah.
Share an example of some time maybe that you were like, that makes no sense, and then carry it out to where it is today to tell us, is that making sense, or is it still kind of in the murk?
Totally. I think one of the most recent things was maybe about 2 weeks ago. I had been entertaining doing a career switch or transitioning out of my current job into a new position. And I remember after I had a final interview 1 week before, I was excited, and they had said really nice things to me, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, I'm so great, and everybody wants me, and that's so true. And so I was really excited, and so every day I was checking my email inbox. I mean, constantly, like, when are they going to reach out? When are they going to send the offer through? When are they going to, send me the money and the offer and tell me how great I am again? And I had become a little obsessed with it, and I've realized that. And so, for example, that Friday night, I was like, God, I am becoming obsessed with waiting to hear back from these people, and it's consuming me. Like, I would be checking it when my partner's trying to talk to me, and I'm not listening to her because I'm checking my email. Someone at work is trying to talk to me. I'm checking it. My kids are like, let's go play, and I'm like, 1 second, because I'm checking my email. I keep refreshing it over and over, and it became the thing that consumed my mind. And so when I prayed to him about it, that Sunday, I kept talking to him about it because I still felt the anxiety on Saturday. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to check my email at all. Addict, one extreme to the next. Like, I'm going to turn off my phone. And then Sunday, I went to church. I just felt this deep peace where basically he told me, don't get too attached to things. You don't know how the future is going to turn out. I just want you to stay with me right now. Can you do that, please? So I was like, okay, I will. And so they said I would hear back on Monday. Whether it was a yes or no, I didn't hear back anything. But the funny thing? I felt just fine. I felt complete peace. The next morning, they called me. They offered me the position. Do you know the emotion I felt after that phone call? And my partner's like, how do you feel? Or people, how I told my friends were like, how do you feel? I felt the same. I felt complete peace. My emotion level hadn't shifted at all. And to me, that doesn't make sense, because I should have been ecstatic, or my heart should have dropped Monday morning at 9 a.m. when they said the email would come through, when it didn't. In either scenario, I should have had an inflection in my emotion level of either sadness or real happiness. And I didn't, because it's the peace of God that passes all understanding. I was just trusting in him for those days, one day at a time.
So you got the offer a couple days later. And yet you felt the same.
I felt the same level of peace.
And that doesn't disappoint you at all, that you didn't feel up or down or whatever? That's awesome.
The funny thing about trusting in God is that, of course, I was really happy that I didn't feel sad on Monday.
Right.
Because I was looking forward to it. But it's funny because, my pride level, on the opposite side, once something that I like happens, woo, I toss out trusting God out the window. I'm like, yeah, I knew it was amazing. Oh, my goodness. Then, by God. I'm going to skip my journal tonight. I feel real good.
Yeah.
But that's the funny thing, and why I use that example of relate, because I should have felt that deep sadness because I've been really just disengaged with my job and really unhappy with it in certain ways. So I should have felt that drop on Monday. I didn't. And on the opposite end, I should have felt that high. I got an offer. It was more money, They really liked me. It was the time that I wanted to start. They were giving me enough time, and no change. I felt peace because I had already come to the decision on Sunday when I was talking to God that no matter how this turns out, I promise you're correct. I will trust in you because what's meant to be is meant to be.
That's awesome. What's a time when you had clear direction of this is what I need you to do, and you said, no, I'm going to do something else, and tell me how that worked out.
You know, it's probably every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But another recent example, I guess, was in November. I was asked to speak in front of our congregation at church. And so, obviously, one of the first things that I always do, because what I've come to understand is anytime God gives me a platform, it's because he wants me to share a specific something to the people who need to hear it in that present time. So this recent example is I asked God, what do you want me to talk about in this talk? And one of the things that kind of adds to a lot of the shame that I felt throughout my addiction is the fact that I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I experience same-sex attraction. And so I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, and I go to church. So for me, the shame is really intermingled, because in church growing up a lot of the times is, and I know that it's the best of intentions, and I don't blame anyone, but there are a lot of homophobic comments that are made in our, not just our church, in all churches, in the realm of Christianity and in faith communities, period, where we would start off lessons. I only went to Young Men's when I was 12, before I really went less active, but even in those lessons, I remember people saying, all right, boys, I know you all like girls, but I have to give this lesson, or everyone here likes girls, right? And the shame would compile on me, because it was like, yeah, I do like girls, but there's also this part of me that likes boys. But I couldn't talk to anyone about it, because nobody talked about it.
Right.
Nobody talked about it. Nobody told me that it was okay for me to be the way I was. Nobody told me that there was another path, because the only times that I heard about people who were gay or lesbian or transgender or bisexual or anything in that LGBTQ realm was when people were whispering in the hallways, did you hear about Jenny's son? I heard he lives with his boyfriend now. And there were tears, and people were so ashamed, and they didn't want, and that person would just disappear from church. They were just gone, and they would never come back, and I would never be able to talk to them again. So this November, I said, God, what would you like me to talk about in front of a congregation of 100 to 200 people who are very conservative and have mostly believe along those lines and have been raised that way with this vernacular about the LGBTQ community, which is mostly negative. He said, I would like you to talk about your sexuality. I said, no thanks. And then I carried on with my day. I prayed to God the next day during my personal study, because I set aside time in the morning where it's just me and him to pray, to read scriptures, to think, to do my step work. Hey, God, what would you like me to talk about in a week when I speak on Sunday? I would like you to talk about your sexuality. No. And then the next day I prayed again. Hey, God, what would you like me? And it was almost like a cutoff. Like, I already told you. Yeah. It's like, I don't know what you want me to say. I already told you what I want you to talk about. It's like, no, I don't want to. I've built such great relationships with these people living in Spokane for the last 3.5 years. And it's not that that nobody knows. My partner knew before while we were dating. Her whole family knew before we got married. My close friends here all know, who I've told and shared that with. But it's not a part of me, almost like the addiction that I just share. Hi, my name is Kastle. I experience same-sex attraction. I'm addicted to several things. It's something that I've always asked God to. I know that this was given to me for a reason, so will you use it for good? And he always has. The impression will come, talk to this individual now. And it typically comes when people are sharing very vulnerable things with me, like they're separating from their partner, or they're telling me about the mental illness that they haven't come to terms with yet, but they're just understanding now, or addiction, or whatever it might be. That's when God usually tells me, share. They need to hear someone else be vulnerable, and to tell them, I know what it's like to struggle and to feel like you don't fit in. But to do that in front of 200 people who are conservative leaning is a little different than one-on-one conversations that are very vulnerable. And mind you, in this congregation, I had probably 3 to 4 people in mind who I had heard make extremely homophobic and negative comments about people in the LGBTQ community. Right. And also understand that I raise my hand in Sunday school and elders quorum and kindly and gently redirect the conversation or rebuke those comments. I don't say, excuse me, I'm right here, because I don't feel that's appropriate in that moment or would be helpful to the conversation. But doing it in front of, saying hey, it's me, is different than doing it in those one-on-ones or speaking generally.
Yeah. So what was the outcome?
Oh my gosh, I was so nervous. And so, of course, I love to invite a bunch of my friends, because I don't care what church you go to. I talk to everybody about faith if they're willing to talk about faith. Right. And I've been to all these 4 friends who came. I've been to all their churches. I love it. I love visiting other faiths and learning about them. So they all came to support me. And the sad part is, Justin, is that I felt more comfort in people outside of my own community and my own church coming to support me, because they also all know as well than I did in a group of people who were supposed to be the same as me. Which is silly on my part, because it's superficial to think that because we all belong to one group, we're all going to think along the same lines. And so when I got up there, the funny thing is that, you know, I had written the talk with God, and it's almost like he took over me, and I just wrote this whole talk out where it wasn't even me. I felt like it was really him guiding it. And I didn't feel nervous at all when I got up there. And, you know, I told the congregation, you know, I'm involved in both, you know, in college, and even now I volunteer for an organization that helps people going through addictions based off the Alcoholics Anonymous. But I also am also a leader in a community that creates safe spaces for LGBTQ individuals. And I said, I'm not just a leader in those realms, I'm an active member in that I experienced both of those things. And you better believe there was nobody on their smartphone in that sacrament meeting when that was said. All the phones went down like, what? And so, you know, I finished and I just shared what God wanted me to share about it. And I just told, basically the basis of the talk was, no matter who you are, how much you're smiling, how great you think you have it together, other people, we all have something that we're going through. So be kind and be aware that God can lift you through anything you're going through. And so I went back down, got off, you know, the front of the stage where people give their talks, the pulpit, and went and sat with my friends. And I had this one person in mind. I'm like, I just know for a fact that they're not going to be pleased.
Right.
They've even made comments about, like, how dare people, you know, in the news when they have people at the pulpit who have come out in our church. Right. Like, how dare people do that? Like, that's disgusting were his words. And I was like, oh, crap. Get ready for the fire. So I walked out into the hallway, and who was at the other end of the hallway, the very end? It was him. He came out the door. I was like, well, still trusting in you, Lord. Just walking towards him, smiling like I always do. He gave me the biggest hug, and he just wouldn't let go of me. And he told me, I'm so proud of you. And he said, I love you. And he said, and I needed you to say that today. And I was like, oh my gosh. And, you know, the three other people in my mind who I was worried about as well, guess who were amongst the many who texted and called me that day? Were all three of them telling me, thank you so much. And these long extended text messages just saying, I hope you know that I love you and that I'm proud of you. And I really enjoyed that talk. And that's the thing about trusting in God, is that no matter what it is about ourselves that we think is ugly or shameful or dark or we can't share it, if I say, God, I'm ashamed of these things, or these things have brought me a lot of pain in the past, but I now give it to you and I want you to use it for good because it's a part of me for a reason. He will always come through on that. And that was just a recent experience of it. But I did not want to come out in front of a congregation of conservative-leaning individuals about my sexuality, which doesn't fit the narrative of our typical church culture look. Right. But I did it because God asked me to. And the result was the same as the job. I felt peace either way. The peace was still there when I walked off the
There's
pulpit.
still a little bit of fear in the background, but there was peace.
Yeah,
right?
it wasn't, I wouldn't even classify it as fear. I would classify the fear as being before the talk. Okay. But after, when I finished, it wasn't fear. It was a consciousness of, okay, Kastle, these individuals might come for you because they've made these comments before, but I was immune to those. The consciousness didn't turn into fear because I was immune because God's peace overwhelms everything else.
Passes all understanding.
Amen.
Man, very cool. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for talking about that very vulnerable thing. Yeah. I really appreciate that. You know, my own eyes have been vastly opened over the last handful of years through my own experiences and willingness to face myself in the mirror and look at who I really am and how God sees me as opposed to how I see myself and as opposed to how I assume everybody sees me as, you know, and it's such a huge blessing in my life to be able to do that. So tell me now how you currently work your step 12 in your day-to-day life. How do you give back?
I might be on an extreme level of always believing that there is a reason for everything and that nothing is a coincidence. And so in working my 12, it's almost like not even something that I consciously think about anymore, to be honest, Justin. I know that God will put opportunities to serve in my path. I know he will every single day, and they're overwhelming, and I won't even get to all of them. But if I can get to the ones that are most important and pertinent to him in that day, I've done my step 12. And you know what that step 12 looks like sometimes? Sometimes it's someone that I really have a hard time getting along with at work, and they keep coming into my head as I'm driving to work, and I'm like, oh, they're annoying. Give me charity, God. Yeah. But they keep coming, and it's like, why do I keep thinking about this person? And then I go into work, and I bump into them, in the hallway or at the coffee machine, which I don't indulge in anymore. And then I'm like, how are you? And I can feel the tears welling up in their eyes. And then I say, you want to chat really quick? And so we go off to a couch, and they're going through a divorce. They just decided the night before. They just had a relapse in something that they promised they would never do. They just got told that they might lose their job. And it's always this ability for me to serve in the way that God has given me talents. And my talents lie in relating to others and in listening and communicating and coming to others' levels. Empathy is a strong gift that God has given me. And so even if I don't like them, it's all put aside because God just needed them to know that someone listened to them that day. And do I talk to them about God? No, not always, when it's appropriate. But sometimes I know that through them feeling that I love them and care about them, it's God. Yeah, it comes through me. He's working through me. Other times what it looks like is I come home and the house is a mess and I'm really annoyed because I'm like, I just cleaned this. I'm like, what were you doing all day, partner? You know, and I'm mad. And then it's like, you know what? If you are bothered so much by this that you can't even focus on loving your family and you're instead focusing on that pile of laundry, then go do it. Stop complaining about it. I clean the house. You know, I cook dinner. Then I clean up after it. And then my partner tells me at the end of the day, Jeanette tells me, she's like, I've been struggling again today with some, you know, dark demons that she faces too. And it's like, I would have never known. I just thought she was being lazy. You know what I mean? Like, and it's never the truth. Right. Or other days when I ask God to give me someone to serve throughout my day, nothing. Everyone's happy. Everyone's cheering. And then at the end of the day, I see my book on my couch. And it takes me back again where God's like, it's you today. I want you to serve you.
Oh, that's great. There's the book on your couch. Awesome. What other insights about step 3 do you feel you need to share at this point?
If I was to wrap it all up about step 3 and any insights that I would like to further share, I would just say that it's a contrasting step to me in my mind because it's really difficult. And once again, do I live step 3 truly every day? Maybe not. There are days where I'm grouchy and I'm like, I don't want to do it, God. But step 3 is the step that continually keeps me coming back, no matter how many times I mess up, no matter how many times I relapse, no matter how many times I feel ashamed of who I am, or no matter how many days I look in the mirror and I just hate everything about myself. It keeps me going for one more day because it's like, if nothing else, God loves me. I'm going to trust in that today. And I'm going to say, God, no matter what it is today, I'm going to trust you. And I will tell him, frankly, I hate myself today. I don't want to see anybody, and I don't want anyone to see me. But I trust you, so lead me where I'm supposed to go. And in those days where it feels like nothing could go right or hope is completely lost, he shows up every single time. Every single time. Step 3 is to me, it's everything. As long as I can continue to trust God, I won't lose myself. I won't lose the path of recovery. You know, even if I relapse, I can come right back because I trust when God says, I will forgive you if you ask me for it. And if you sincerely repent, I'll give it to you. I didn't believe that before. I thought the atonement applied to everyone but me.
Right.
But as long as I truly trust his words, I'll be okay.
Really cool. And I think this might be the last question here. People will listen to this who are either maybe standing in the shadows and going, I think I have a problem, or saying, no, it's just a little problem, or people who are deep in addiction and maybe even attending groups in rooms of recovery and everything. And then there will be spouses or partners of people who are struggling with these things. What invitation do you have for these people to provide them with a little bit of hope and some motivation to get moving?
You know, the first thing that I want to say to everyone is, I love you, and God loves you. And I want to tell them that no matter who you are or what path you're on right now or what path you're coming from, God is always waiting with open arms for you. He loves you. He will never stop loving you, and you are worth it. And you deserve all the goodness, the joy, the peace, and the love that comes to you. You're worthy of it because you're a child of God. That's what I'd like to tell them. And then the invitation that I would like to leave with them maybe sounds trivial or small, but I would like to ask anyone listening to this to please say a sincere prayer and ask God to show you how he sees you. Ask him, God, can you give me a glimpse of what you see when you look at me? Because every time I've done that, I've been shocked. I'm like, oh gosh, that's how you see me. And it lights my fire to continue down the path of recovery and down the path towards Jesus Christ. Because it's like, man, this world would have never given me that picture of myself, no matter how much money I had or how good I looked or how much prestige I had. But when God shows me what I look like to him, when he looks at me, oh my gosh, the possibilities are endless. I'm filled with light. And so that's my invitation. Say a prayer and truly ask God, can you show me how you see me? And I promise he will.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Kastle. Thank you so much for your willingness to share your experience, strength, and hope. Didn't you just think that was amazing, everybody? Man, I am so grateful to call Kastle not only a recovery acquaintance, but a personal friend. And that is a huge blessing in my life. Anyways, thank you again, everybody, for your support of RECO12. If you find value in these meetings and in these episodes, please consider donating and rating and reviewing in the podcast platform of your choice. And remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Now keep coming back. Let's trudge this happy road of destiny together.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and binded with the seal